large collection from Mesoamerica and the Andean region as well, except I forgot the Andean textile I didn't bring. Sitting around the table. We'll talk about other stuff. BYU's done excavations in Mesoamerica, Guatemala, southern Mexico, and a lot in the Southwest. A lot of the more modern items are gifts to the university from collectors, and we'll talk about who some of those collectors are and how they ended up here as we go on. So if you have any questions at any time, please just shout. We've got a lot of time periods to cover, so if you're like, what about this thing? Let me know, just ask. So I thought I'd start off with two kind of anomalies in our collection. This one is, any guesses on when it might come from, what it might be? A what?
A shingle.
A shingle. It's a roof tile. So this is a roof tile from Mission San Miguel in California. It was collected by a random individual, essentially, who went around around the turn of the 20th century throughout the West and was collecting all kinds of historic items. And he made his way down to Southern California to the mission and picked up this piece. That's all we know about it. It came from the mission, and he collected it in about 1900. At that point in time, the mission was mostly abandoned. It wasn't really being used as a mission anymore or for church purposes. Any questions? It's like the only piece we have of Spanish mission history at the museum. This little one, and later there will be time we can just walk around. So this little figurine, little dog figurine, again, was collected by kind of an unknown person. We don't know who did it. This was one of our early donations to the museum. They didn't keep amazing records. All that we have for this is that it was collected from a Spanish galleon near Key West. So this could be referencing a Spanish dog style. Anybody familiar with dog breeds from the 1600s? European ones. I'm a little more familiar with West Mexican dog breeds, which there's slight resemblance, but not really, to West Mexican dog breeds. That's all we know about it. We don't have a time period. One of the challenges with working in a museum is if you don't have provenience information about where it came from, how it was collected, where it was found, we're really limited in what we can tell about it. So we could do some stylistic analysis on this and maybe get it within a few decades based off of artistic style, but that's about it. We don't know the ship name, we don't know anything more about that. We're going to move to northern Mexico. It's called a hooded effigy jar. It's from the Casas Grandes culture region, which is in northern Chihuahua, which is in the midst of the Mormon colonies down there. Anyone familiar with Mormon colony history in northern Mexico? So, I can't remember how many there are, but colonies were established in the late 1800s in northern Mexico, right around the same culture area. The culture wasn't agricultural culture. They raised corn, which is why we see a lot of overlap with where the LDS pioneers settled, because they were also agriculturalists. So they're building their communities on the same watersheds, the same floodplains that would have grown crops anciently. So you see this not just in northern Mexico, but throughout the Americas, the arid West, where communities are established is usually where ancient communities existed, including Provo, Salt Lake, everywhere along the Wasatch Front. We've had some researchers come and look at this one, and in particular, they were looking at the design style of what this person might be. And one researcher, pair of researchers' conclusion is this is a shaman, and that the marks on his body depict being in shamanic trance. On the back side, we see this figure with sort of a curly element coming off of his head, and they're saying that that is the shaman in flight, in his shamanic trance that he is flying around, representing that altered state of consciousness. And the other evidence that they use to talk about that is the circles. So they feel that those circles represent cigar burns, that is part of the process to enter into the shamanic trance, that they would burn themselves to achieve that sort of higher state of consciousness. It's a fairly unique form. We don't see this style of vessel elsewhere, like more north in the Southwest, where we have this hood coming over the top. It's pretty unique to that northern Mexico, very southern Southwest culture of Casas Grandes. I forgot to say the time period in it. So this is, I look up my notes. James, do you remember from the top of your head?
Not for that. I did older.
This is about 1000 AD to about 1400 AD. So this culture really had its fluorescence pre-contact. It appears that it was already in decline before European contact happened, but European contact definitely accelerated additional decline. We have a faculty member in the anthropology department who works there. He's going back 2026, well, and in a couple of weeks, to do a little more background research on the Casas Grandes culture. And part of the question is what really was going on with the collapse? Why did the population start to shrink around that time period, since it was even before Spanish contact? Questions? No? Yeah.
Yeah, why is it like a vase? Like, what would you put in the back?
Good question, because it's not very useful for a cooking vessel, right? It's extra thing to do with. We're not entirely sure why they're vase shaped. We have effigies from other cultures and other regions where they're just solid bodies. It could be that they were putting in liquids or foods that were associated with shaman principles, not just foods, but other stuff associated with shamanic practice. But we don't know that for sure. I don't think that anybody has done any sort of residue analysis. Sometimes you can do residue analysis and get information on what was stored in these things. This one we can't, for several reasons. You want a vessel that has been recently excavated, so there's no potential for cross-contamination. This vessel was actually a gift. This is a gift from a family, an eldest family that lived in the colonies through the 50s, 60s, and 70s. Don't remember exactly when they brought the item out of Mexico. Before that time, before the 70s. And then later, about 15, 20 years afterwards, they just put it in the museum. So we don't know how they used it. People do all kinds of things with pots in their houses. They could have used it as a flower pot, they could have used a food storage pot. We don't know, so we can't do any kind of residue analysis on it. This polychrome style, meaning multiple colors, black and red and tan, is unique to that time period and the design style, so we can date it fairly confidently because of the designs on it, even though we don't know exactly the location that it came from. Any other questions on these first three items? Okay, we're going to move further south. I'll pass these around if you want to touch these. You don't want to. These are the latex impressions from these ceramic molds. So you can see the inverse, right? This is gonna be the inverse of what we want to make. So they would make these ceramic molds, and then crank out thousands of figurines. And you can just put some more clay in here, turn it out, and make hundreds of clay figurines relatively quickly. We see these clay figurines all over Mesoamerica, southern Mexico, into central Mexico. Every country has their own unique laws for protecting antiquities, and they're all different. So the concept of personal ownership in the United States is different than the concept of personal ownership in Mexico. We, in the United States, if you own land, you own everything on that land. Does not matter. Doesn't matter. There's like one exception, if you find human remains. But essentially, you own everything on that land. Ancient, modern, everything. You buy that plot of land, you own that land. That's not the same for other countries. In some countries, you can control the land and build a house on it, but if you find anything on that land that predates a certain time, that's the property of the government, by default. Sometimes countries will allow the person who is using and owns the land to keep those objects on the land, but they're still not allowed to sell them or to give them away. They sort of have to stay in that vicinity. So anytime where someone's like, hey, here, I found this artifact, just be careful. Try to figure out what the laws are for your country, because the United States has signed treaties with all these countries that prohibit importing antiquities after 1970. You have to have permits and special approvals to do that. Any questions? Kind of jumped around a little with that. We'll go to this. I think this is a cool mask. So there are modern masking traditions all over the world. Mexico. This one, I do not speak Spanish, so I'm not gonna, I'll try, but forgive me. It's from the G state, Guerrero.
Guerrero.
From the mid-20th century. So we had a donor couple start contacting and reaching out to BYU in the early 1980s. They had no affiliation with the university. They're not members of the church. They just liked BYU for some reason. And they started giving us their collection of masks. So they had gone to Mexico many different times in the 60s and early 70s to these festivals and towns that would have mask festivals, and would collect a couple of masks each time we went, purchase them from people, and they started giving them to us. So we have about 100 or so masks from 3 different regions in Mexico from festivals. So if you're looking for like a research project, you want to do masks and masking, we've got some examples that you can look at. So jaguars, animals, bats. There's a more Christian characters in one of the festivals. That second mask over there is actually from Guatemala, but it depicts the conquistador, part of a similar kind of tradition in Guatemala. So while this one's fairly rough, that one's a lot more refined with the plaster, painted plaster. That one to me looks like somebody spent much more time intentionally probably using it year after year. This one to me is like, oh, we're probably going to put it together, use it once or twice, and we're done. The hair on this one, in case you're curious, is javelina hair. Questions about masks? Masking in the Americas goes way back thousands of years. here. So we have one little tiny carved jade figurine. Didn't think to bring this one. That's about 1.5 inches tall. That depicts a human wearing a jaguar mask as well. So some of you are probably familiar with the jaguar. It's a powerful symbol in Mesoamerican mythology anciently. People would wear the masks to assume symbolically or in some ways literally the power of the jaguar. So we see it not just anciently but all the way in present time. Any ideas what this might be? Unless you're an archaeologist, you probably have never seen one of these or paid attention to these before. I'll walk down on this side. Glass. So these are associated with volcanic eruptions or volcanic activity. So as in certain conditions, the magma will cool and form a glass-like substance. I mean, it really is glass. It fractures really well, so it's a great material for making tools out of. This style is fairly unique to Mesoamerica. I don't think I've seen anyone, no one in North America uses this same thing. This is what you would chip things off of. So this is called a core. And what you would chip off of it are these blades. They're called prismatic blades. So what you end up with is sort of a trapezoidal cross section with razor sharp edges on both sides. They would take these prismatic blades and use them as knives, but they would also embed them in wooden swords. So these are horrible, vicious instruments because they're so sharp. Fractured, anyone seen, no, cartoon, where he goes to the underworld, Day of the Dead.
Oh,
Disney.
Coco.
Coco. No, not Coco, the other one. Book of Life. Book of Life. And he goes to the judgment point, and that big monster comes up and brings down a giant sword. Embedded in that sword is prismatic blades. So these would cut through leather. These are just very destructive, very sharp instruments.
And conquistador accounts going into Central America say that they saw people get cut through armor. Like, these swords were intense. De-limbing capabilities that were unmatched. Except they ran into guns, and that's a problem. That's fine.
Yeah, so cloth, leather, armor, it doesn't really stand up. You can cut through that stuff super quick. You all been cut by glass, right? So imagine a blade of it coming across you. Even if that edge cuts, there's still going to be cut edges following up behind you. So this is an exhausted core. They can't make any more from this. This is what they would have thrown away. It would have started 3 or 4 inches in diameter, and then they just chip off hundreds of those flakes until they get too short, too small to be useful. And they're super thin.
Feels pretty sharp.
They are sharper than razors, sharper than scalpels.
There was a professor on campus that would demonstrate shaving.
There was one person who, to prove a point, used them for eye surgery because the edge of the blade is so fine that you could get the fineness of cut that you need. Something I wanted to point about these, what color were they? Like, this looks black, right? So obsidian can actually come in several different colors. Sometimes you have to hold it up to light to see. Black is usually the most common color, but these green ones will show up. You can have green obsidian, and you can have red obsidian. Because they're volcanic in nature, and every volcanic eruption is unique, we can chemically trace where every single piece of obsidian comes from, if we want to take the time and spend the money. So every volcanic flow is unique. So we can trace where people are trading obsidian because it was such a valuable resource. That there's green obsidian in and around the Valley of Mexico, but we find that green obsidian all the way down into Guatemala, being traded hundreds of thousand miles, and some of it makes its way north as well. Because of the color, because of the quality, it's not all the same. There's obsidian sources in Utah, but most of them are kind of garbage. You're not going to get amazing things like this. It's just not the same crystalline structure that allows for these really long fractures. These are also made out of obsidian, except for this one. The clear one's made out of crystal. These are ear spools or gauges. How is this up? Yeah, you can see this one. One that's looking up. See how thin?
That's obsidian?
That's obsidian.
No way.
So it's like less than a millimeter in thickness. So they weren't just adept at understanding and making things like chipping, but using other lapidary techniques. They knew how to grind. They knew how to make very fine things like this. These are so fragile. I don't like touching them because they're so fragile. So the question is, how do you make something that fragile? It's going to be a very expensive item because you're going to have a lot of waste, a lot of broken pieces in the process.
So where did we get those gauges? Was it from like a family, kind of like the other ones?
They were from a personal collection from a collector. He also was active in the 60s. But he tended to collect from auction houses and antique dealers in the United States. So we have a better record of where he got them here, but less better record of where they came from. So we know where they came from stylistically, but we can't pinpoint anywhere within Mesoamerica for sure. Yet. We could figure out where the obsidian came from, but that doesn't guarantee where they were actually used or manufactured.
Are all of them from Mexico,
Yeah.
and how old are them?
They're going to be anywhere from 200 or 300 BC to about 900. We see a drop off in this really refined kind of obsidian work later. Same with these start out pretty early, but by the time the Spanish come in, the metal replaces obsidian relatively quickly, and especially this kind. If you have a metal sword versus a glass sword, there's a slight advantage for the metal. Yeah. Any other questions? So these are just more blades. These would be ceremonial blades. You'll see sometimes in Maya and Aztec pictures depictions of these leaf shapes on people's bodies, that they would be decorative, be worn as sort of a pictorial decoration, or as symbols of power. power. So when you see symbols and you're like, is that a powerful symbol? You might want to think about what is the material that we can't really tell from the picture. If it's a symbol of power, it's likely going to be connected with a process or a material that's rare, or something that is worth controlling, or has that sort of a social weight to it that comes from being passed down because it's value or its social value. Those also break, right? These things break all the time because they're glass. So to find them complete is pretty rare. And if you look on this one, you can see where someone more recently took a chip out of it. Just setting it down wrong on like a wooden table like this can be enough to chip off a small flake. Okay. Any other questions?
And they made arrow points with obsidian.
They made
right?
arrow
So-
points with obsidian. They used lots of other stone types as well. If it could hold an edge, they would make tools with it. Obsidian is just, it's like the highest quality stone you would want to use because it flakes so nicely. If you get a good source, it has very few inclusions, so you can get these nice long breaks, beautiful shapes. They will actually, there are examples in I'm more familiar with ones from classic Maya, where they actually make shapes out of them. And they will flake profiles, shapes of people onto these massive ceremonial blades that are 18 inches tall. They're just incredible pieces of art and very expensive. I can't imagine the level of skill that it requires to flake all that stone and not break it. Okay. This one is from the state of Chiapas, an archaeological site called Chiapa de Corzo. BYU has done excavations there. They did excavations many decades ago, but still worked in the area. This particular piece comes from a burial where 3 of these were found. So it's a set of at least 3. Did I say what the animal was?
No.
Any idea what the animal is? An armadillo. So, anybody familiar with the various species of armadillo? There's a 3-banded, I think there's a 5-banded, 5 or 7, and I think a 9-banded armadillo. We don't know what they were doing with this armadillo. These are the only armadillo things from the site. I have not run across any other kind of armadillo artifacts. Maybe they're out there, but I personally haven't seen them, so I don't know what they mean. But for this person to be buried with 3 of them is really intriguing to me. This is pre-Maya, so this is right on the cusp of the transition from the Olmec culture to Maya culture in the region. Some of the earliest potential writing is found at this site, and it's just sort of, they're stamps that have just like 1 or 2 characters, but they think that those are the beginning of writing in that area specifically. So this armadillo pot is, that's the wrong one. Oh, I forgot to write it down. 500 to 200 BC. So 2,500 years old, 200 years old. Any questions about armadillo? Yeah.
Is there not really any other armadillo examples of art coming from that period?
I haven't seen any. But there's a giant caveat with that. There are so many cultures and so many time periods to understand all of them. That has to be your specialty, right? So maybe I should ask. We do have a recently retired faculty member. He's the one that recompiled all the field notes from the 50s and early 60s on the site and wrote a more detailed report. I should ask him, but that's been his whole career. He spent the last 40 years studying Olmec and pre-Olmec cultures in the Chiapas region. So if you move out, he's not going to know. If you move later in time period, he's maybe a little familiar, but he wouldn't know either. So it gets very specific very quickly. You can be a Mesoamericanist, but there's thousands of years of history and hundreds of cultures to understand them and keep track of. Yeah, I wish I could. Armadillos are really weird. Okay. Let's jump to the next two. Anybody recognize that plate or the base? Suspect what culture, time period it might be from?
Aztec is more north.
Mayan. Yeah. So Aztec is central Mexico, and they come down at times, but Aztec is also later. These are, the tall one is post-classic, meaning it's coming after the fall of the Maya civilization. There's still societies around, there's still large communities, but the high quality art is diminishing. Some cities have fallen into disrepair. That pot is intriguing because it doesn't say anything. So if you were to look at this, your initial reaction might be like, that looks like Mayan hieroglyphs. Somebody should be able to read that. But that's not the case. These don't say anything because literacy was on the decline, but people knew what literacy was and they tried to use it to their political advantage. So somebody made this, wrote symbols on it that looked like writing, but it doesn't say anything because they wanted the prestige of writing on this vessel, but they didn't actually have that prestige. Does that make sense?